is that it doesn't just say that God tramples the waves of the sea. It says that he alone does this. So when the Gospel of Mark depicts Yeshua as walking on water, it's really significant and shows the Gospel of Mark does indeed intend to depict Yeshua as divine. Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of my Divine Messiah in Mark series, where, as the title would suggest, I tell you the different ways that I think the Gospel of Mark depicts Yeshua as divine. If at any point you think this video is helpful, please give it a thumbs up and check out part 1 if you haven't already, but it's not necessary to understand this video, so let's get right into it. The first passage I want to read is Mark chapter 4, verses 37 through 41. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he, Yeshua, was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? And he awoke and rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? And they were filled with great fear, and said to one another, Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? Now there are two passages in the book of Psalms that are worth noting here, and that's in Psalm 65 and Psalm 107. Let's look at 65 first. Verses 5 through 8. By awesome deeds you answer us, with righteousness, O God of our salvation, the hope of all the ends of the earth, and of the farthest seas, the one who by his strength established the mountains, being girded with might, who stills the roaring of the seas, the roaring of their waves, the tumult of the peoples, so that those who dwell at the ends of the earth are in awe at your signs. You make the going out of the morning and the evening to shout for joy. And even more obvious, Psalm 107, verses 28 through 30. Then they cried to Yahweh in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. Notice they cry out to Yahweh in their distress, and Yahweh stills the storm and hushes the waves of the sea. Now, when you have the psalm in the back of your mind and you see a story about the disciples crying out to Yeshua in their distress and Yeshua calms the storm, it's no wonder then why the disciples asked, Who then is this that even the winds and the sea obey him? It's true that other prophets like Moses and Elijah had power to some extent over the elements, and so this alone might not seem like proof that Yeshua is Yahweh, but the parallels here are striking with these psalms. But in case that's not enough proof for some people, let's move on to Mark chapter 6, where I think we get even stronger proof that the Gospel of Mark is intending to depict Yeshua as divine. Mark chapter 6, verses 45 through 52. Immediately he made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had taken leave of them, he went up on the mountain to pray. And when evening came, the boat was out on the sea, and he was alone on the land. And he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. And about the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost, and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said, Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. And he got into the boat with them, and the wind ceased, and they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. Now I want you to consider what we just read in light of Job chapter 9, verses 8 through 11. Speaking of God here, who alone stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea, who made the Bear and Orion, the Pleiades and the chambers of the south, who does great things beyond searching out, and marvelous things beyond number. Behold, he passes by me, and I see him not. He moves on, but I do not perceive him. Now you probably already noticed at least one big parallel between these passages, and that's the walking on the water. And notice what's significant about what Job says is that it doesn't just say that God tramples the waves of the sea. It says that he alone does this. It talks about God who alone stretches out the heavens and tramples the waves of the sea. So when the Gospel of Mark depicts Yeshua as walking on water, it's really significant and shows the Gospel of Mark does indeed intend to depict Yeshua as divine. Now, in my opinion, there are at least two more parallels between these two passages, starting with what Mark tells us right after he tells us that Yeshua came to them walking on the sea. He came to them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them. Now let's go back to that same chapter of Job where God is described as trampling the waves of the sea. Behold, he passes by me. I want to go over a few verses where the Old Testament describes Yahweh as passing by in similar language. Exodus 33, 21 through 23. And Yahweh said, Behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock, and while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand, until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. Also Exodus 34, 5-6. Yahweh descended in the cloud, and stood with him there, and proclaimed the name of Yahweh. Yahweh passed before him, and proclaimed, Yahweh, Yahweh, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. And finally, 1 Kings 19, verses 9-11. Then he came to a cave and lodged in it, and behold, the word of Yahweh came to him and said to him, What are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I have been very jealous for Yahweh, the God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. And he said, Go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, Yahweh passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks before Yahweh, but Yahweh was not in the wind. So this language of Yahweh passing by is actually deeply rooted in the Old Testament, which makes it even more significant that Mark chooses to use this particular language of what Yeshua meant to do. But there's still one more parallel that I want to bring out between these two passages. He moves on, but I do not perceive him. Now consider what we just read in light of Mark 6 one last time. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out, for they all saw him and were terrified. Notice in Job 9, God passes by and he does not perceive him. And here, Yeshua means to pass by them, and his disciples don't recognize him, and they think he's a ghost. In other words, they don't perceive him. So I think there's another clear, obvious parallel between Mark 6 and Job 9. Now, one of these would be important. Two of these is even more significant. But when you have three clear, distinct parallels between these two passages without even having to go to other parts of the Bible, I think it's clear that the author of Mark was alluding to Job 9 when he wrote this passage. Now, I don't think he made it up. I think it was a real event in history. But I think he knew, or at least the Holy Spirit inspired him to write it in such a way that it clearly mirrored what we see in Job chapter 9, verses 8-11. So in other words, Yeshua is the God who alone tramples the waves of the sea, who passes by, and who is not recognized. Now there's one final point that I want to make that I probably wouldn't have made otherwise, but considering all these other connections to Yeshua as Yahweh, I think it's worth pointing out. And that is that when Yeshua reveals himself to his disciples, he says ego eimi or ego eimi, which literally could mean I am or it is I, which is the same way that God is described when Moses asked God, what is your name? And he says, tell him that I am has sent you. And in the Greek translation of the Old Testament Hebrew scriptures, known as the Septuagint, when he says I am has sent you, that the Greek that is used there is ego eimi or ego eimi. Now again, on its own, it can be used in an everyday sense. So if that's all we had in just a regular context, I wouldn't point it out. But seeing as this is in the middle of all these other ways that Yeshua is depicted as Yahweh God himself, I think it's worth pointing out. Well, I hope that was helpful for you, and if it was, or you think it would be for others, please give this video a thumbs up, and check out part 1 if you haven't already. And Lord willing, I'll finish this Mark series and move on to the other books of the New Testament to show that Yeshua clearly is Yahweh God himself. Anyways, I hope you have a wonderful day, and may God bless you.